All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to part two of our long history of race relations series. I know we still have a couple folks who are coming into the webinar right now, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce us to get us started. I am the host for tonight's program. My name is Keith Simmons. I'm the communications director at Florida Humanities. And I think we have a really exciting program in store for you tonight in the launch, as I said, of the second part of a really compelling race series. Back in 2020, Florida Humanities launched this series in response to George Floyd's murder in May of that year. The intent was to develop a broader public understanding of Black history in Florida, knowing that while each state has distinct characteristics to its history, the undercurrents tend to be universal. These programs were created with the vital assistance of Dr. David Jackson, the Associate Provost for Graduate Education and Dean of the Graduate College at Florida A&M University, and Steve Seibert, Executive Director Emeritus of Florida Humanities. Over 900 people joined us for those first four programs that comprised that part of the series. Tonight, we continue the conversation with a part two. Faith and Fortitude, Stories of Black Women in Florida is a three-part series that emphasizes the experiences of Black women here in our state. We can think of no better way to begin the celebration of Women's History Month than by starting off with these topics. I'm going to introduce the hosts or the panelists and our guests for tonight in just a moment. But first, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. You can participate in tonight's conversation by entering your questions in the Q&A field. We're going to try to integrate as many questions as we can into the conversation. Now, conversations on race and history can invoke passion. Our goal is to create an opportunity for dialogue that is honest and respectful. Florida Humanities does not necessarily endorse the opinions of panelists or of any audience members. There are two additional programs that are going to be coming up in the series. Faith and Folklore, Sites and Black Women's Stories in the 20th Century takes place this Friday, March 5th at 6 p.m. And Refusing to Be Silenced, The Political History and Future of Black Women in Florida takes place next Tuesday, March 9th at 6 p.m. You can register for these programs and see others that we have available by visiting our website, floridahumanities.org/events. At the end of tonight's program, you will receive a short feedback survey in your email. We would greatly appreciate you taking a minute to fill it out. Let us know how we did, ways that we can improve next time, and other topics that you might be interested in seeing in the future. Your support, by the way, is essential to helping to sustain these programs. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we ask that you consider visiting floridahumanities.org/support to contribute to our organization and to continue to make these programs a possibility. And with that, tonight, I want to introduce our host for tonight's program, Dr. Tamika Hobbs. She's an associate provost and associate professor of history at Florida Memorial University, the only historically Black university in South Florida. She is the author of Democracy Abroad, Lynching at Home, Racial Violence in Florida, and she is a member of the Florida Humanities Speaker Directorate. And with that, I turn it over to you, Dr. Hobbs.
Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you for the invitation and for the introduction. I want to thank the Florida Humanities for this opportunity and for sponsoring this series. And hello to everyone who's watching. My name is Dr. Tamika Hobbs, and as Keith said, I am Associate Provost for Academic Affairs, Associate Historian, as well as the founding director of the Social Justice Institute at Florida Memorial University in Miami Gardens. And I am absolutely thrilled to serve as moderator for the 3-installment series that is the second part of these conversations, the long history of race relations in Florida. I had the privilege of participating in the first round that was moderated by my colleague, Dr. David Jackson at Florida A&M back in the fall. And I'm really thrilled about this series and the speakers that you're going to have a chance to hear from tonight, but between now and next week. As Keith mentioned, this series was sparked by the need to move and the desire to move towards some type of racial understanding. And I'm a firm believer in the role that the humanities play in helping us to address and understand contemporary issues, because while our modern society is incredibly fast moving, many of the roots of the situations that we're dealing with today can be found in our collective history. And so again, I think the Florida Humanities has done a tremendous job in sponsoring this. And so we're here on the second day of March 2021, kicking off Women's History Month with this series that is entitled Faith and Fortitude, Stories of Black Women in Florida. And what can you as a viewer expect from this session tonight and this series? Well, to explain, I want to start with a quote that comes from Dana Ramey Berry and Collie Nicole Gross and their book that was published last year, A Black Women's History of the United States. And this is what they had to say about the significance of Black women's history in storytelling. And I quote, "Black women's history in the United States is broad, beautiful, exciting, haunting, and crucial to understanding the nation. It is a testament to the intellectual richness and vitality of Black women. This history also holds the country accountable for its still unmet promise to make democracy serve all equally." And while the authors Berry and Gross are addressing the story of Black women nationally, I would argue that that is equally true for us when we examine the story of Black women in Florida. Black women sit at the intersection of race and gender, and in that gap, they can often be ignored. And while studies of Black history can compensate for part of this deficit, Black women's stories need to be pushed to the mainstream. And that's our intention with this series. During Faith and Fortitude, we will span Florida's chronology from the 16th century to the modern era. Likewise, we will span Florida's geography from Pensacola to Key West and a few spots in between. It will be impossible for us to capture every story, but we hope to elevate a few and to inspire both your appreciation and your curiosity. What can you expect from tonight's conversation? Well, this first conversation is entitled Genesis, Sites and Black Women's Stories of Old North Florida. We're going to start with the earliest period of Black presence in the 16th and 17th centuries, during the period during which the Spanish, the British, and Africans all connected in this indigenous land populated by the first peoples who lived here. And we will explore what their experiences were like. These would be difficult times and difficult topics because, of course, when we talk about the beginnings of the Black presence here during the colonial period, Black women's bodies were viewed as both for the use of production and reproduction. And so even with that, I will say that you will find within those gaps the ability of Black women to exercise agency and to exercise their own direction for their lives. And from there, we're going to bring these stories forward and traverse the periods of enslavement to the Jubilee that was emancipation, and then into the dawn of the 20th century. And I would like to start now by introducing our speakers for tonight. I would like to start with Ms. Althemese Barnes. I met her as the founder and director of the John G. Riley Center Museum for African American History and Culture in Tallahassee. I like to brag that I was her first paid employee, as she and her co-founder were volunteers at that point in time. But we go back many years, and she has not only trained me, but served as a source of inspiration during my career. So it's really special to be here with her tonight. Aside from that, she's also the founder of the Florida African American Heritage Preservation Network. And so really glad to see her. Her awards and her work are beyond description, but she's done single-handedly, I believe, more to advance the preservation of African American history in the state than many people. Secondly, I would like to introduce to you the Honorable Teniadé Broughton. She is a graduate of Booker T. Washington High School, the University of West Florida, and Florida A&M University. She is deeply active in her home community in Pensacola, and she's a seventh generation Pentecostal. Her family spans 7 generations in Pensacola. She's also a member of Allen Chapel AME Church and is the president of the John Sunday Society chairperson of the Escambia County Equal Justice Initiative, and a member of the Gallery Night Pensacola Board, the Pensacola Bicentennial Celebration Committee, the Junior League of Florida, and Just Pensacola. And recently she was elected to represent, I believe, District 5 for the city of Pensacola as a member of their council. So welcome, Teniadé. And then last but not least, we have with us Adonnica Toler. She is a museum administrator for the Ritz Theater and Museum, a restored historic movie theater in La Villa neighborhood of Jacksonville, Florida. Revived in 1999, the theater and museum's mission is to preserve and celebrate the rich African-American history of Jacksonville. Adonnica has curated over 60 national and local history exhibits in the Ritz Museum Gallery, of which 2 received the Jacksonville Historic Preservation Award. Her work has also been received internationally and recognized with an art exhibition on display at the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan Art Museum in Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality in South Africa. She is a noted tour guide, historian, and has a bachelor's degree from Florida State University. And so I welcome them, but I also would like to, in my introductions, while we're talking about land and settlement, acknowledge the first people who lived in this land that we call our home, the Timucuans, the Appalachee, the Seminole, the Creek, and the Mississippi. We want to acknowledge and pay tribute to their role in all of this. So to get us started, I am going to share my screen, and Teniadé, I'm going to be coming to you to get us started, as you are from the oldest portion of our state. And so we want to acknowledge that as we begin chronologically. So Teniadé, when we think about Black women in historic Pensacola, what are the stories that come to the top of your mind?
Many stories, but I had to make a list. So I want to share with you all just a brief tour of voices or lifting voices of women who have been historically silenced in my city. Some are individuals, some are groups. And I'd like to start at the very beginning for what would be Pensacola. So here, and I took this photo at this site for a reason. This is at what we now know is the De Luna settlement, 1559. 11 vessels, about 1,500 people arrived in Pensacola, and among the fleet were about, well, the numbers say a couple hundred Aztecs, Spanish families, and free and enslaved African people. This is important because, well, it's not just important because as a Pensacolian, I'm noting that this is before St. Augustine, but also because this is our first multi-year European settlement. There are tons of, we always knew about it, or we've known about it for a long time, but only in the past couple of years were they able to correctly identify the settlements. And it was actually by mistake. An archaeologist was walking by and saw what looked like 1559 pieces of glass, and it ended up being the entire settlement. So, but this story is important because for me, it's the introduction for Pensacola. It is the introduction of the African presence in Pensacola, and I guess to a degree, other parts of Florida too, although, for the purpose of being a multi-year settlement, not an exploration, but for the purposes of the settlement. And when we consider the role that African people played in the building of this early settlement, of course, they would be doing the work. And for the duration of this 2 years, if any African child was born, that would have been the first African child born in what would be the United States, as far as these multi-year settlements go. Now, when we, the name, we're fortunate because we have the name of one of the African people who are a part of the settlement. And her name was Guillermo De La Tierra Biafara. The Biafara suggests Biafra, meaning she might have been an Igbo woman from Nigeria. The name Guillermo means in Spanish, it means famous in battle. Now we could create stories about what her capture would have been like, how she got the name because it's a Spanish name, and what she did to earn the name. But if it has anything to do with the fact that she earned it from either fighting back or just being a warrior woman, that lends to the possibility of a story in itself. And really, when we think about how we create these myths around explorers, what would it be like to create a myth around someone who was famous in battle that's an African woman? So just stepping aside from the historical part, right? We know a lot of this stuff becomes myth making anyway. And she was sold. We know her name because there's a record of her bill of sale for 170 pesos in Mexico. And eventually, her being a part of this settlement makes her the first named African woman to live in what would become the United States. So that's where I start the story with her for that reason. And I'm standing there in memory of her.
I appreciate that. That is powerful to think about that. The first named African woman there at the Luna settlement, and we can say her name, Giamari. And you're absolutely right. When we can only imagine where that name, the origins of that name, because we do know that exploitation, sexual exploitation, the exploitation of labor was very much a part of the experience of those first Black women. And so thank you so much for uplifting. Now, what I caught in the middle of that, though, you caught that Adonnica. We had West Florida trying to come at East Florida because there's this contest, right, between the two coasts of who was there first. And so I think that we have receipts from a representative Broughton from West Florida. I come to you in East Florida. What are some of the stories when we think about the earliest presence of Black women in East Florida that you would like to uplift as a part of this discussion?
Well, I I would love to. I think oftentimes when we think about Black women in East Florida, we think of Anna Kingsley, and which rightly so. But interesting enough, in my preparing for this presentation, and let me tell you about Anna Kingsley. She actually was captured. She was from the Wolof people in Africa. She was a princess, but she was captured, and she was actually purchased in Cuba by Zephaniah Kingsley. And she was about 13, and he ended up marrying her. He ended up considering her as his main wife. But he had other wives. He had communal wives as well, and all of them were African. And interesting enough, upon his death, all of them received property in the will. You're not thinking of Black women owning property that early in American history. But I actually came across another African woman. She was from Senegal. Her name was Anna Gullum, and she actually comes on the scene. There's a trace of her in 1781, and by then she had married her owner, who and her married name was Anna Wiggins, and she married her owner. He freed her. She had 6 children by him, but he actually married her, and because it wasn't a Catholic ceremony, it wasn't considered legal, or it wasn't honored in Spanish territory. And she was married to this gentleman for about 30 years until he died in 1797, and she became a landowner, slave owner, landowner in 1797. So Anna Kingsley was a little girl when over in Africa when this happened. So I never heard of her, and she hasn't been talked about as much as Anna. But that also lends to what the situation we have, where you're talking about African American history and the role of Black women in addition to that. So it's a very, it's just having this conversation is really awesome because we're now acknowledging all the women that went before us. We are aware of what Black women have dealt with in our generation, but can you imagine in colonial time when basically your position is you are, as was stated earlier, to produce and reproduce, and that's basically what your station in life is. And then you come in a situation where now you're an owner. And for Anna Wiggins, she had some challenges to running her property because her marriage wasn't considered legal. She had to really fight, go to court, which she actually won, which is amazing. But she had issues with keeping that property because she wasn't considered legitimate, because this Black woman with this property, and how we're still dealing with that issue even today in 2021, that, oh, you're a Black woman, well, what you doing with it, that kind of thing, and are you even capable of handling it? So Anna Wiggins and Anna Kingsley, now Anna Kingsley by far was the most successful of any Black woman running properly in this era.
Can you,
We know her
and that
name.
kind of brings me to this image that we see. Can you tell us what we're looking at on the screen right
So
now?
this is the plantation on St. George Island in this area here. This is where Zephaniah Kingsley settled here. Now Zephaniah, it was very interesting. He was a Quaker that came from England, ended up here, and he actually was a slave smuggler. So after slavery was deemed illegal in the United States, this property, the back of this house, is on water. So Kingsley would actually smuggle in slaves on his property from the back in his property on St. George Island. He continued to smuggle slaves into the territory. And it's a beautiful property. If you've ever been there, it takes about 2 miles to get to this. When you turn to come, there's all these trees. It's just one path, and then it's just this beautiful view. You see the water behind the house. It's just this beautiful, almost paradise type thing. And then you realize it was a plantation. It had, a lot of pain and agony in this territory, and it's beautifully today. These are the slave.
Adonnica, if you can hear us, you're frozen on us, but these are other images that
Facing the plantation.
There you go. Okay, we got you back, I
These
think.
are the house. These are the, you see that? Yeah. So these are actually facing the plantation house, and then like the back of the house is the water. So they're actually looking at the water, toward the water territory.
Yes,
And so and when Kingsley died, this is the property that Anna controlled. She had orange groves. She grew indigo. When the territory, Florida, the Spanish territory, was taken over by the British, she actually fled to the Haitian island, but settled on the side of Dominican Republic. And she stayed there for a while and came back to take claim of her property, which she won. And to this day, and let me backtrack. To this day, there are Kingsley relatives that still live in Dominican Republic to this day. But she came back to Florida to take claim to her property, which she was awarded.
That's absolutely amazing story.
Yeah, that's
someone's life
really amazing.
Who comes full circle from herself being caught up in bondage to, as you described, by the end of her life, she is a slave owner herself, which entitles her to a certain level of privilege and power. And so the contrast that we see in her own life, but also within the range of experiences of Black women in Florida during this period, is quite amazing. I would just like to lift up though, because while we are here on this side of the Atlantic and many of our stories are embedded within the story of enslavement, the experience of enslavement. I had a chance to travel a couple of years ago to Dakar, Senegal, and I was researching and reading while I was there and learning more about the culture. And I would just like to testify that Anna Kingsley is celebrated there. Her story is remembered. Her tale of woe and her kidnapping had been preserved as a part of the oral history in the griot tradition among the Wolof people. And so when they began to learn about what happened to her in the Americas and that she, ended up and by relative sense doing well for herself and being a woman of property, that has been incorporated into modern song. Even they sing the tale of Anna Kingsley to this day in Senegal. So I just wanted to offer that as we bring that story full circle.
Full circle.
So I want to move this along a little bit further and in our chronology and also in our geography, and take us to Central Florida. Tallahassee was founded as a city in 1824 and has some similarities to both of what we've been talking about between Pensacola and Jacksonville, but also has some unique stories. And I'd like to bring Mrs. Barnes into the conversation now to lift up some of the stories from the Tallahassee area during this, and really as we pivot from the period of enslavement into emancipation. Mrs. Barnes?
Okay, Tallahassee, Lynn County. And I know this is Florida focused, but I wanted to share a story of a Mary Elizabeth Bowser, who was a spy for the Union Army during the Civil War. And I say that because that history has a pivots really into the role that many women up in the Panhandle, where we had 73 plantations, the most of any county in the state. But with Mary Elizabeth Bowser was a spy in the Confederate White House. Okay, she was born in 1839 and on the plantation of Van Loo. The daughter of the owner became an abolitionist. And what she did after Van Loo died, the daughter, of course, inherited Mary Elizabeth. And she actually placed her into the home of Jefferson Davis to work. But she was presented as this, or perceived as this, ignorant Black woman who could not read or write, but she had a very indelible memory. And so as she went about her work, Jefferson Davis would meet with his military cabinet and whomever, and they would freely talk about what their plans were going to be in terms of the enslaved people and how they were going to go about winning this war. But at the same time, there was Mary Elizabeth Bowser passing this information on to those on the other side. So she would pass the information on to General Grant and the others. So that leads up to the Civil War, the ending of the Civil War, and the role that African Americans assumed, African American women, after the end of the war, moving forward, Reconstruction. We know that Blacks after slavery had a passion for religion and education. In Lynn County alone, we had 52 one-room Negro schoolhouses. And who were most of the teachers? Most of the one school principal teachers were African American women. So coming out of slavery, the Riley House has sought or found its role to be early on to promote those people who are lesser talked about. And in many instances, they are women, Black women for over 400 years who have served in these different roles, from being landowners to business owners, educators, and even in their domestic roles. I knew that there were a lot of other photographs here tonight, images to be viewed. So I just want to direct people to our website, because what we do, the name of our organization, John Gilmore Riley Center/Museum, that center stands for research, because from the very beginning, our goal was to go as far back, as deep as we could, into the history of ordinary people who made significant contributions. So one of our main exhibits is the Uncrowned Queens exhibit, where we have over 50 African-American women who during their lifetimes, a lot of people didn't know all that they were contributing. Now just imagine these people living in slavery, 73 plantations. They are the cooks, the cleaners, the whatever, but they come out owning acres of land. They come out teaching all of the newly freed slaves and their descendants, and making it possible for them to become that next generation. So I will direct listeners to go to www.rileymuseum.org and read about all of the African-American women, Lynn County, Tallahassee specific, and in detail see what the contributions have been from the days of slavery forward.
Thank you. But can you talk to us about the woman that we see on our screen right now, which is connected to Tallahassee, another one of those uncrowned queens that you're discussing.
Okay.
Tell us who she is and what her role is.
Okay, is that the Debbie Edwards with the?
Yes, that is Debbie Edwards.
Okay, Debbie Edwards was on the Lake Hall plantation. And when the Civil War ended, January 1, 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, of course. It wasn't until May 20th, 1865, that slaves in Lynn County were told that they were free. They knew, but Florida was a rebelling state, as were 7 other states, including Texas. So a general was sent to Lynn County, the capital city, General Edward McCook, to announce to slaveholders that all states in rebellion must release the slaves. So when he did that, among those women was Debbie Edwards, the picture that you see. Of course, she was coming out of slavery, one of the slaves enslaved. Debbie Edwards and her good friend Sarah Hill were 2 Black women in Lynn County to start the first commemoration, celebration of their freedom from slavery. And that was on May 20th, 1867. It was 2 years after the signing of the proclamation. And to this day, the family of these 2 women still hold that commemoration celebration in Lynn County, Tallahassee. At a point, Debbie became ill and couldn't carry it on, but Sarah Hill, who was her friend and much younger, continued. And if we go into a knitting of the generations here, because Sarah Hill took it over, then Sarah Hill's offspring picked it up after Sarah passed on. So that message, that history is not lost, continues to this day. And so all of what we are doing here, I call like a knitting of the generations. We should know that history from the root cause, the root point to present.
And you're really speaking about legacy, the legacy of these Black women who took it upon themselves to organize their community to commemorate the anniversary of freedom in Tallahassee in Florida each year. Can you talk to us just a little bit about those emancipation celebrations? Because we know some of it now. I actually grew up and my roots are in Suwannee County in Live Oak. We used to have May Day. I don't think it was until college when somebody started to connect the fact that the May Day that I grew up with in my community was actually the legacy of these emancipation celebrations. Can you talk to us about what these celebrations have meant historically to the Black community?
I sure can. And in fact, I was thinking about my husband as you spoke, because he shared the same experience. He said they had a celebration in May in Key West, but nobody ever connected it to emancipation. We have gathered news clips from all the way from Caryville, Pensacola, on through Jacksonville, Ponta Gorda, on down. And we've been circulating those as a part of an education, because Mrs. Eartha White in Jacksonville also had the emancipation there, but it fell away. But some of the citizens there now are in the process of bringing that back, hopefully this year in May. So we need to, I know it's important to have the national recognitions, but as we grab the hype of words like Juneteenth, it sounds, popular. You go, you dance, you bring your junk of news, but we need to understand that all slaves were not freed at the same time. Mm-hmm. There were 7 states that were in rebellion. And what happened in Texas on June 19th happened in these other states on different dates. So that's where I think the national hype is taking over the local histories. But as local historians and residents of these various states, and this is my pitch, we need to make sure that our own states mm-hmm. preserve their history. Yes. Otherwise, we will not continue to knit the generations. I know about it because when I went to school from kindergarten through 6th grade, I was in an all-Black school, church school, and of course we had separate but equal at the time. That was a holiday for us. And there are many others who had that same situation. Mm-hmm. So as our governor decides that he wants to do a paid holiday, and other states, make sure that we are educating people so that they know which day that holiday should fall on.
Actually, I hear you loud and clear. I wanna echo and thank you for the work that you've been doing to educate and elevate the accurate history for the state of Florida. I do stand by the idea that until all of us are free, none of us are free, and Juneteenth definitely deserves a place on our calendar. But if we're going to be absolutely historically correct, it's that May 20th day that has the most meaning for us as historians. And so it's a really important piece of this. And then you've also done something that's really important into looping the legacy of these emancipation celebrations to the work of Black women who were central in helping to organize these celebrations. So I thank you for that. But right now I want to pivot, and Adonnica, I heard you nodding fervently. I saw you nodding when she mentioned Eartha M. White in connection with emancipation, and I brought up her picture so everyone could get a glimpse of her and know her face. But Adonnica, I want to bring it back to you to tell us about Eartha M. White and her contributions to the community in Jacksonville. And Teniadé, be on standby because we're going to come back to you as we continue to talk about Black women, Black club women.
Yeah. And so, yes. And I want to, and though Eartha White really brought life to it, it actually was her mother, Clara White, her adoptive mother, who had been a slave. And upon being freed, she actually helped lead the charge to start the Emancipation Proclamation celebration. And Eartha just took the baton and really, it really grew. And what's important about Clara, again, once Clara also was freed, she actually started helping the people around her that she noticed that was going hungry and didn't have clothes. So Eartha White actually grew up seeing her mother do this. And I thought I gave you a picture of them together, but Clara really is the inspiration behind Eartha's work. She was known for looking after other people, and she even told Eartha, the key to your success is serving people, is being a help to people. That is the key to your success. And so Eartha White took that to heart and ended up being so important in preserving African American lives in Jacksonville. You're seeing this really great picture of the old folks home, which was actually put together in 1895. Eartha and her mother Clara came together and made this happen. There was a group called the Union Association who was trying to raise money for older Blacks to have a nursing home, to be in a home because they were poor and they didn't have one to take care of them. But it was Eartha and her mother, Clara, who made it happen. And so this is Eartha with some of those old folks, and some of them are in their hundreds. And that's Miss Jackson with her. Miss Jackson sitting on the step with her, worked with Miss White until she died well up in age herself. And so Eartha White, her thing was if she saw a situation that needed fixed, she did it. And so the Old Folks Home is just one of many organizations she established to serve the community. She had an Old Folks Home. She had a home for unwed mothers. She had a home for drunks. She had a parental home for boys and girls. She had her own Mercy Hospital. She was considered the first social worker in Jacksonville. And during this era, the courthouse where the police department was and everything, they actually gave her a desk. And this was her desk in their building. And so she was known that if you needed something to eat, you needed somewhere to stay, you find Eartha White, or you get to Eartha White, she's going to help you. And so, but she was also a businesswoman. She was an entrepreneur. She had a department store, grocery store, taxi service, laundry service, daycare, employment agency. So she was an entrepreneur, a humanitarian, philanthropist, and politically active. In 1920, when women had the right to vote, and they were stalling them, having making all kinds of excuses why they can't vote. Eartha White came out with some lemonade, say you stay in this line, ladies, and you vote. She stay in this line, you gonna vote. Do not get out of this line. And she would make sure they were hydrated and fed. You stay in this line and you vote. So she was just an all-around woman concerned about the existence of African Americans in our community, but she was also nationally known for that as well.
It's her story is absolutely phenomenal, and it really speaks to the work that Black women and the role that we have played in our communities historically. Whenever we have encountered a need, we've taken whatever exists and we have put it together and made it greater. And I just want to acknowledge that the Clara White Mission still exists in Jacksonville, still operates. I've had the privilege of taking some of our students there when we came on our legacy tour of Jacksonville. And I just got a shout out, Florida Memorial University, when we were stationed in the city of Jacksonville as the Florida Baptist Academy. Eartha M. White was a graduate of our class of 1896. So we like to claim her among our alumni. And so just a spectacular story there. I'm going to come back to you, Teniadé, when we talk about Pensacola, because this is not just something that's isolated to Jacksonville or to Tallahassee. When we talk about Black women working in service of their community, this is a fairly universal phenomenon. What stories can you tell us from kind of this late 19th, early 20th century
I would actually have to start a little before that with the foundation of this with free women of color. And particularly go back one more, please. So most of us have seen this photo. This is Dido Bell. But right now I'm talking about her mother, Maria, who was in the record we know is a Negro woman of Pensacola. Right now, the archaeologists and other scholars are trying to determine if Dido herself was born in Pensacola or not, but we know she was raised in the house of Lord Mansfield in England, in Kenwood House. And you've seen the movie, so you know how they interpret the effects of her presence. Just really, these white folks being able to see the humanity in Black people. But before that, though, with her mother Maria in Pensacola, owned a home, and they're able to tell in the artifacts around her home, there was a well, there was tea set, stoneware, things that dictate a life well lived for this African woman. And in Pensacola, we had, they practiced the system that we now know as plissage, which was the common law marriages between white men and Black women. And oftentimes the children that were a product of these unions, they passed down property. The fathers often educated the children. And this was really the first time you see in Pensacola that we see this blossoming of even, I don't know, middle tier between Black and white. We had this stratified system of race here. So and Dido will represent that. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see two houses of free women of color. One was
could you restate her name again? Dido?
Dido Bell.
Dido Bell.
Mm-hmm. Now these two houses, the Julie Cottage and the Susanna Crespo Cottage. Now when we look in the census, when we see these marriages, or these common law marriages, we're gonna call them, and we see this transfer of property to Black women, see, this is the foundation of ownership for African Americans that would after the Civil War would really become the beginnings of the initial beginnings of that class of landowning folk, free before the Civil War type Black folk. And this, you can see the architectural style is to the curb, to the sidewalk architecture is very Gulf Coast Creole. The porch, you see it all. And these two houses are just examples of homes that stand today that were owned by free women of color. Now, remember, no one was writing about us. And we're talking about giving voice to the voiceless. No one was really writing about us in praise. No one was really speaking of us sweetly or kindly in their poetry, in their prose. But what we do have are these records, these deeds, and the stories as we can pull them from whatever documents are available. So we don't have monuments, but we do have houses. And that's what this represents to me. These are our monuments. This is how we know that these women lived, that they loved, that they had children. And that's why saving them is so important. Now this house here, La Casa De Las Casas, honestly, this was a brothel. Everything was segregated, of course, including the brothels. So this was the Black women's brothel. It was built, I want to say 1830. White men and Black men could visit this brothel. Of course, Black men cannot visit a white brothel down the street. And all this was a part of our red light district down by the waterfront. Now, if you go to the next slide, when these women would have children, as sex workers sometimes did, they would be raised by the St. Joseph's Society, which was the original founders of the church, St. Joseph's Catholic Church. All this is a part of our Black Creole Catholic community. And they had a church, they had an orphanage, they had a school. So they really ran these women ran all these institutions to an extent to where the women the sex workers who had children, they could still be in touch with their children. Now all these folks grew up, right? So whether it be plissage or whatever kind of arrangement you came from, remember there was a strong privilege with this proximity to whiteness, with your father being white or your family just had being free before the Civil War. In Pensacola, we call it half Black and half free because at one point in time, about half the population was of African descent, and half of those folks were free. So you have a large free Black population in urban slavery, the outcome is going to be a little different from what we see maybe in Middle Florida.
Absolutely.
So these children of landowners, you go to the next slide, please,
Okay.
the next picture. They'd often, so this is their story. Her father is a grocer, I believe. He had a grocery store, one in Pensacola, one in Mobile, and one in New Orleans. He placed his sons to run each store. She married. She comes from a free people of color, free before the Civil War. She has diamond. Her pendant is 2 diamond horseshoes because her father was in that business. Her, as you can see, her hat. I think that's the type of
fantastic hat.
It's
a great hat, isn't it?
It's a type of Madras, you know, and they lived between Pensacola, Mobile, and New Orleans. Her name, she married a Pons. This woman's name was Lizzie. Lived right down, as we say, down the way on Government Street, right? So this was the type of style, fancifulness, the type of just vision of daughters of privilege. And this is what this would have looked like in Pensacola.
Mm-hmm. So we're seeing a range of experience from, from enslavement to sex workers to, women like Ms. Pons who are well-to-do, wearing diamonds, to entrepreneurs and philanthropists like Eartha M. White, educators and community workers like the women that Mrs. Barnes described. So I love what we're doing in terms of complicating our understanding of the lives of Black women in our state. What can you tell us about this image, Teniadé?
So I pulled some of these folks who were from the territorial guardian laws. When they passed the laws, they basically taxed Black people. When we talk about the Black tax, like they literally taxed Black folks, to try to, in an attempt to push them out of the state. So whereas white folks were charged, I think it was 55 cents, Black people were charged $3 or something like that. But in that list of guardians, when free Blacks had to pick a white guardian to conduct business, some of the people I featured in these photos are those descendants. Number one, because of course there are photos of them, right? But also it shows that even though everything in the law, all of the Black codes were positioned against them, they still survived. Now, whether they had to go to New Orleans, go to Mobile, come back to Pensacola, we still see them. And here is the Chastain family, which is a well-known family in Mobile, with the Soto family, a well-known family in Pensacola. As you see, these people still have Spanish and French names, and these are their children at the father's funeral. And these families still live in Pensacola today. The matriarch in the middle, Mary Odile Chastain Soto, and her children. So imagine what it would have been for her to, be able to keep her family together when people had to flee to Mexico. And of course, we have records of them fleeing to Mexico, just being torn apart because they had to choose if they were going to be Black or going to be white. We have stories of some of these people going to California or just moving up north, never coming home. So the fact that her sons, particularly the ones on the far left and the far right, well, all of them really. How about that? The fact that they decided to keep part of their Black identity and keep their family together says a lot.
Yes. And I want to be sensitive. I know we are running short on time. We only had an hour for our program and we're right up against that. I do want to invite for anyone who is listening or watching, if you have any questions for our panelists, please do drop those into the chat so we may ask them. There is one here and it's asking about May 20th. I'll bring this to you, Mrs. Barnes. They want to confirm, so May 20th is the day that enslaved Africans were freed in the state or just in Leon County. Can you speak to that, Mrs. Barnes?
Oh, no, when the reading took place in Leon County on the steps of the Knott House by General Ed McCook, accompanied by the Union troops, it was read in Leon County because that is the capital city, capital county, but it affected the entire state of Florida. And if that person would leave an email, I would send you news clips dating back to the 1800s forward, where commemorations have been held across the state, Volusia County, all of them. If you would just leave me an email and I would send that to that person so they can see.
All right, so Chess Cano, if you're still with us, if you would follow up with your email address, we can get you that information so you can have some primary source documents
Exactly.
to support that query. So as we are wrapping up, I don't know if we have any other, let's see, I have some more comments here. Maybe we
One
have
of the
some more.
things, if I could just add really quick, Dr. Hobbs, one of the things that we started to do and we're still building for the first part of our series is a list of resources, primary sources, secondary sources that people can tap into to learn more about this history. And I think we would like to do the same thing with our panelists and our speakers tonight. For any of this information, any resources that you think would be valuable to our viewers, that we can give them access to that so they could get that information.
Excellent. Yes, we have a couple of people who are replying with their email addresses so they can get more information. So we'll make sure that we collect those, Keith, and circulate those. So as we are closing, I just want to, we didn't get to everything we wanted to get to. This is a really tight time constraint to do as much as I'd hope we would do. But I'd just like to ask each of you, as we reflect on the legacy of Black women in Florida, particularly during this period, the earliest period in our history, what is top of mind for you? What would you like our audience to remember about Black women? I'll start with you, Mrs. Barnes.
I would just like our audience to remember that for 400 years, a little over 400 years, Black women have played a major role in terms of the success of not only Black people, but whites. They were the nurses, they were the what do you call it, wet nurses, the keeper of the children, the nannies, and they carried the little children to school, and so on and on and on. And so I would like our audience to remember that. And I do want to just say one thing. When Adonnica mentioned Clara White, I thought about what is happening in Georgia now with the voter legislation, where it's included in there, though it might not pass, we hope not, is that going forward, they cannot give water, food, or anything to people standing in line waiting to vote. And that's the same thing you said, Adonnica, that Clara White would say to her people: do not leave out of the line. You're going to vote. And she would give them food, to give them nourishment and water, to keep them there to vote. So we are full circle. We're coming back. That's why it is important to knit the generations, understand what it means about social justice and healing. But you can't respond to that without having that root history. That's why it's important not to lose that.
Absolutely. It's that it's the handbook, it's the guidebook for what we need to be doing today. And so thank you for that, Mrs. Barnes. I'm just going to go down my screen. I see you next, Teniadé. What would you say to our audience? What should they remember about Black women in Florida?
Well, as a former Riley House intern, I'm going to just go with what Ms. Barnes said and touch and agree.
She raised us right. That is right. And then last but not least, Adonnica.
Yes. And so take what you've heard tonight and just know that our history is so vast. Go into your subconscious mind and get out the imagery that you see of us on television, and know that's not all of us. That is not us. And think about how strong these women had to be to come from slavery, to come through and have ownership. So don't just be amazed about what you heard. Now is the time for you to go find the book. It's time for you to go start digging to embrace this and get this into your system, because again, what Ms. Barnes said, it is going to be the fuel that you're going to need to move forward so that you can continue to do great things.
Thank you, Adonnica. What I hear is move beyond those stereotypes, that we're not just this flat, singular experience. If you've been paying attention this evening, you have heard a range and a diversity of experiences of Black women across the state of Florida, the northern state, the oldest part of the state. So I want to thank each of you, Mrs. Althemese Barnes, the Honorable Teniadé Broughton, to Adonnica Toler for being here with us this evening. I want to thank everybody who has been watching and listening. We've collecting your email addresses and we'll make sure that we share a recap of the information and resources that were mentioned tonight. I just like to close by asking everyone to tune in for our next sessions. This Friday on March the 5th at 6 p.m. we will have installment number 2 of this conversation entitled Faith and Folklore, Sites and Black Women's Stories in the 20th Century. With us, we'll have Dr. Julia Chambliss, Dr. Amina Shakir, and Dr. Ashley Robertson Preston, who will be our discussants. And then next week will be the 3rd and last installment. We will focus on the theme, refusing to be silenced, the political history and future of Black women in Florida. We talked a lot about politics tonight. We will spend our entire hour next week delving into that subject. Again, Tuesday, March 9th at 6 p.m. We'll be joined by Dr. Sharon Austin and Dr. Paul Ortiz, both of the University of Florida, and Ms. Francesca Menes with the Black Collective here in Miami, Florida, to talk about the contemporary issues facing Black women in leadership. So with that, I'll thank you again, and I'll turn it over to Keith Sivens to close us out. Keith.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hobbs, and for all of our panelists participating this evening. And thank you to all of you who tuned in to, I think, what was really a special and inspiring program. As I mentioned at the beginning of this program, you all will receive a survey, and we'd like to get some feedback about what you enjoyed and ways that we can improve next time and other topics that you're interested in. And as I also mentioned, we're going to make this recording available as soon as possible, as well as all the resources that are mentioned. So it's a great way to be able to share this with anyone that missed it. And I think it's also strong encouragement for them to join us for the programs on Friday and next week. And so with that, thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.